Okay, this lecture is about Haji Shariatullah from chapter 1. This is the last and third religious reformer from chapter 1. I have divided the lecture into 5 subheadings in order to discuss the answer to the exam question. We have 4, 7, 10 and 14 mark question. I can make a mention of these questions. For example, we have a 7 mark question like why did Haji Shariatullah wish to revive Islam in India? Then we have another 7 mark question like why did Haji Shariatullah have such a major influence in the revival of Islam in India? And we have a 4 mark question like who was Haji Shariatullah? Describe Faraizi Movement. And who was Mohsin-e-ud-Din? And then we have 14 marks question. This part of the lecture, the heading work, is very important because 14 marks question generally demands the work or contributions of any religious reformer. So you, in order to answer this, the 14 marks question, you have to mention the contributions of Haji Shariatullah and you have to mention the contributions of 2 other religious reformers. We can discuss the 14 marks question. Like we have a question like did Haji Shariatullah contribute more than anyone else in the spread of Islam in India before 1850? Explain your answer. Then we have another question, 14 marks question like was the work of Haji Shariatullah the most important factor in the revival of Islam in India? Explain your answer. And then we have then the 7 marks question. So by the end of this lecture, I will try to cover the answer to all the exam question about Haji Shariatullah. I can start with the background, but there is a story to tell about any topic of history. Because I believe that if the students are taught and explained in the form of story, it becomes quite easier for them to understand and to keep in their memory about the dates, events, name of personalities, events and so on. So I would firstly by discussing the background, try to tell a short story about Haji Shariatullah and his Faraizi movement. Haji Shariatullah was born in the year 1781 and died in 1840. This was the time when the British rule in India was quite established. Although the East India Company was still making territorial expansion, it had already taken control of Bengal by the year 1757. And after taking control of Bengal, it started ruling over Bengal, and over time it imposed heavy taxation on land. And what happened that it became very difficult for the Muslims in eastern Bengal to pay the heavy taxes. So what happened that in order to pay the taxes, the Muslim landlord, they started selling their land. And who were the buyers? The rich Hindu were the buyers. And this is how what happened that as the land kept changing hands from the Muslim to the Hindu and the British landlords, the Muslims started losing their land and they become peasants. So what happened that over time, as the Muslims started losing their land, they started becoming peasants, whereas the Hindu and the British, they became the big landlords, and as they acquired more and more land, they become more powerful, and with power they started oppression of the Muslims in eastern Bengal. They started oppression, exploitation of the peasants and landlords in eastern Bengal. And what happened that particularly Hindus, as they became more powerful with the possession of more land, they started exploitation. For example, they imposed heavy taxes on the Muslim peasants and landlords, and they also demanded undue payment from the Muslims in order to make arrangement for their religious activities. For example, Dargah Puja. Dargah Puja was basically a celebration. They used to celebrate about their goddess annually, and in order to make arrangement, they used to demand payment from the Muslims. And then what they did, they also put ban on cow slaughtering. So this is how the Muslims started. The Muslims started economic exploitation. The Muslim basically faced economic exploitation under the British and Hindu landlords, and their religion also came under threat. So what happened that over time, Haji Shariatullah, he was very concerned about the fate and about the exploitation that the Eastern Bengali Muslims were facing under the big Hindu and British landlords. So as you can see, Haji Shariatullah was born in the year 1781 in district Faridpur in Bengal. His family was not very wealthy family, and his father was a farmer. And in the year 1799, Haji Shariatullah, at the age of 18, he traveled to Arabia, and he stayed in Arabia for about 19 years. And while he stayed in Arabia, he basically acquired his religious education, Islamic laws, philosophy, and 2 years he stayed at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. And he was very inspired by the teachings of Sheikh Abdul Wahab while he stayed in Arabia. In the year 1818, he returned to Bengal, India, and he decided to launch his religious campaign. But he wanted to take permission from his teachers, so he went back to Arabia and took formal permission from his teacher to launch his religious campaign in Bengal. And then by about the year 1821, he returned to India and he started his religious campaign in order to make his contribution. Now basically he believed that Indian Bengali Muslims, they were away from proper Islamic customs and Islamic teachings. Number one, this is belief number one. And secondly, he believed that in order for the Bengali Muslim to overcome and get rid of the economic oppression, they had to start performing obligatory worship, the Faraiz, for example, Hajj, Roza, Namaz, Zakat, so that they could get closer to their deen and overcome and eliminate their economic problems. Thirdly, he declared Eastern Bengal as Dar al-Harb, because he believed Dar al-Harb, as I told you before, that when the Muslim territory comes under a non-Muslim rule, it is called Dar al-Harb. So Haji Shariatullah, he believed that since Eastern Bengal had come under the non-Muslim rule, the British rule, it basically became Dar al-Harb, and he put ban on Friday prayers and Eid prayers because of it being Dar al-Harb in accordance with his belief. Number 4, he believed that Indian Bengali Muslim, they basically were not adopting the Muslim customs in their life. They had they were adopting the non-Muslim customs in their life. So he wanted the Bengali Muslim to purify their life from the non-Muslim customs. This is how, because there were 2 reasons for why the Bengali Muslims were close to the non-Muslim or particularly the Hindu custom. Number 1, mostly the Bengali Muslims, they were largely uneducated. They did not have much knowledge about Islam. Number 2, they were mostly converts from Hinduism, and they were still retaining the Hindu custom. Now basically, number fifth, he believed that in order to overcome or restore the glory of the Muslims, the Muslims must implement Islamic laws. Now basically he was highlighting two types of problems under his beliefs. Number one, social and religious. Haji Shariatullah, through his Faraizi movement, why do we call his movement Faraizi? Because he put emphasis on the Bengali Muslim that they should start performing Faraiz, Namaz, Roza, Hajj, Zakat. So that was why his movement is known as the Faraizi movement. And this movement based Haji Shariatullah, he observed that, he found that the Muslims were facing socio-economic problems. So he in order for the Bengali Muslim to get rid of their socio-economic problem, he believed that they had to revive their religion. They had to come closer to their religion. So this is how Haji Shariatullah basically tried to connect economic problems, economy to religion, and that was why his movement is also known as socio-economic movement. And so basically since his belief, he addresses the problems, socio-economic and religious problems. So in order to address these problems, he started working. Number one, we are going to start now his contributions, his work. He believed that he basically tried to convince the Bengali Muslim that they should avoid oppression under the non-Muslim oppression through the Faraiz, through performing their obligatory part of their worship, so that they could overcome and ultimately get rid of their economic problem. So basically, number two, he put emphasis on the Bengali Muslim, the Muslims in Eastern Bengal, that they should, in order to overcome the problems that they were facing, particularly under the Hindu oppression of the non-Muslims, they had to basically come closer to their deen, and in order to, they had to resist the oppression. For example, there were indigo planters who were carrying out oppression on the Muslims, on the Muslim peasants, and he tried to convince them that they should resist the undue payment that the Hindus were demanding, and he also convinced them that they should reject the heavy taxation, undue payment. So basically, Haji Shariatullah, he resisted and rejected the undue and unfair payment that the non-Muslims were demanding. Number three, he tried to create unity among the peasants, the Muslims in Eastern Bengal, by putting an emphasis on all of them that they should start performing Faraiz and they should come closer to their deen. And this was basically the Faraizis, they started wearing a particular dress code so that they could they could be distinguished from other members of their community, and this is how he tried to create unity among them so that they could face the challenges. Number four, Haji Shariatullah, he basically tried to purify the life of the Muslims of Eastern Bengal, because there were many Muslims, Eastern Bengali Muslims, who were still retaining the non-Muslim custom. For example, there was at the childbirth, there was some rituals that were associated with Hinduism. So he tried to convince them that they should avoid these such customs, so that they could purify their life from non-Muslim custom. Then he also declared Bengal as a Darul Harb, and he put ban on Friday prayers and Eid prayers. But it is very important to note that he did not wage jihad, because when any Muslim territory is declared Darul Harb, what happened that the Muslims in that territory, they either wage jihad or they leave that territory. But he did not wage jihad. He basically started resisting the oppression that the non-Muslims were carrying out against the Bengali Muslim. Now basically, when he started his religious campaign, when he put emphasis on the Bengali Muslim that they should start performing fries, they should get closer to their deen, they should resist the undue payment, they should not pay the heavy taxes or the undue payments. This basically, all this alarmed the non-Muslims, and particularly the landlords who were carrying out exploitation. And what they did, they basically pushed away Haji Shariatullah from the region, from his area, and he ultimately died in the year 1840. But with his death, the Faraizi movement did not end. His son Mohsin-e-ud-Din or Dudu Mian or Dadu Mian. I am writing these names of the same person. Mohsin-e-ud-Din was the son of Haji Shariatullah. He was also called Dudu Mian or Dadu Mian. He was born in the year 1819 and died in 1862. He basically carried forward the work of his father Haji Shariatullah, and he was more like a man of action. Haji Shariatullah, as I told you, that although he declared Bengal as Darul Harb, he did not wage jihad. But his son Mohsin-e-ud-Din, he basically started resistance against the oppression of the non-Muslims. And what he did basically, he resisted the oppression of the non-Muslim. He divided the Eastern Bengal into various circles and appointed his representative that were known as the Khalifas, who used to look after the social, economic and other needs of the Muslims in those areas. So basically, he also raised his private army. Then he also tried to establish a parallel government. Why? Because he wanted to establish a government in order to counter the British and the influence of the British and the Hindu landlords. Then he was also encouraged, he also tried to establish the legal system. For example, he promoted village courts, panchayat system, in order to contain or counter the governmental legal system. And he believed that land belonged to God, therefore land tax and no tax should be imposed on land. That was what alarmed the landlords, particularly the Hindu and the British landlords, and there were clashes between the Faraizis and the landlords. And what happened that in the early 1840s, like in the year 1841-42, what happened that Haji Shariatullah, there were clashes between his son Mohsin-e-ud-Din and the landlords and the government. And what happened that he was arrested. Mohsin-e-ud-Din, the son of Haji Shariatullah, was arrested, and along with 48 of his followers, and the government also pursued a legal case against him, and ultimately by the year 1848 the Calcutta High Court basically set aside the conviction, and that was the major victory for the Faraizis. His movement, this is how he was arrested again and again and released. But what happened that in the year 1857, when the Indians rose up against the British, when the Indian revolt occurred, Haji Mohsin-e-ud-Din was again arrested by the government, but he was then in the year 1859 he was released. Then he was again arrested, but ultimately he was released in the year 1860. But in the 1862 he died, and with his death the Faraizi movement diminished or declined. Now, what was the impact or influence of the Faraizi movement or the contribution of Haji Shariatullah? Number one, this was the movement that basically boosted the confidence and morale of the Bengali Muslims who were facing the oppression under the non-Muslims landlords. Number two, his movement basically revived Islam because Haji Shariatullah put emphasis on the performance of obligatory part of worship, the frais, and this is how the Muslims in Eastern Bengal, they started following, observing the elementary part of the Islamic worship, and this is how it became very this is how Islam, revival of Islam, Islamic religion in Bengal took place. Thirdly, this movement basically created unity among the Bengali Muslims because the Faraizis they adopted a particular dress code that would distinguish them from the other members of the society, and this is how they also started observing frais. This is how they became a separate group and became united against the oppression that the non-Muslims were carrying out against them. Fourthly, number four, he basically tried to create this movement under this movement, as I told you, that in the belief that Haji Shariatullah was inspired by the Wahhabi school of thought. During his stay in Arabia, he was much influenced by the teachings of Sheikh Abdul Wahab. So what he did basically, this movement, Faraizi movement, also promoted the Wahhabi school of thought in Bengal. Number five, this movement also created a high purpose of a sense of high purpose among the Bengali Muslims, and they became more conscious about their rights, about their economic, political and religious rights, and they started resisting the oppression of that the non-Muslims were carrying out against them. Number six, this movement basically also to some extent created a sense of separateness among the Bengali Muslims, because they get united and they were basically trying to highlight, trying to preserve and assert, highlight a separate identity in order to be distinguished from other members of the society, particularly from the Hindu and British landlords. So this actually created a sense of separateness that over time promoted the Pakistan movement later on. Number seven, this movement basically also created an awareness among the Bengali Muslim that they started protecting not only their religion, but they also started protecting their economic rights, and they were resisting, they started resisting the non-Muslims who were carrying out oppression against them. So number eight, this movement was much about the rights of the peasants from Eastern Bengal, who were largely the Muslims, and there was basically the clashes between the Muslim peasants in Eastern Bengal and the Hindu and the British landlords. And in order to basically protect their rights, the peasants get united, they become much aware than ever before, and they started resisting the oppression that the Hindus and the British landlords were carrying out against them.